welcome. We have an opportunity today to really get a good sense of what's happening in the Caribbean as a result of the coronavirus and COVID-19, however we refer to it. We have today Dr. Michelle Mcload, who is the head of department and program director at the Center for Hotel and Tourism Management here in the Bahamas. Over the course of the next hour, we're going to just talk a little bit about Caribbean tourism. Needless to say, this is probably the biggest blow ever, but certainly in our lifetimes, of Caribbean tourism, where so many of our source markets have shut down, so many of our destinations are shutting down or have shut down. And so it has a tremendous effect on tourism, which is necessarily a personal service business. So needless to say, when people start talking about social distance, things start talking about shelter in place. You can talk about some people working remotely, but certainly there's no such thing as a core part of our business ever working remotely. So, Michelle, from your point of view, I mean, what is it that you are hearing regarding the status and the position of tourism in the region?
Thank you so much for your question, Vincent. You know, the Caribbean region receives over 60 million visitors, about 50% stayover visitors and 50% cruise visitors to this region. And since the COVID-19 crisis has come, you can say each week the region will receive 1 million less visitors. And so there are some countries who would be particularly impacted by this. The Bahamas received over 7 million visitors, Dominican Republic over 6 million, and then we have Jamaica over 4 million visitors. And so we have to be very mindful of the economic impact on these countries. And of particular concern is the unemployment situation that has occurred with the closure of many businesses and hotels throughout the region. You have taxi drivers who are without employment, straw market vendors, and so it goes on in terms of the rippling effect of the slowdown or non-existent tourism industries throughout the region.
Michelle, one of the things, certainly from your institution's point of view, is being able to get a sense of history about whether we have some examples of the past that we can draw on and conduct some research about how to assist other, from examples from tourism that happened before, or some examples from elsewhere. Have you come across any study that can be drawn on that can educate, help the region how to begin to recover from this?
Tourism recovery is an area of research that has been gaining interest, particularly with a number of catastrophic events happening. When you look at the tourism academic literature, what has been coming out relates a lot to natural disasters rather than what we are having now about infectious diseases. What has been of concern during such a crisis would be the messaging. How do you communicate to those persons involved during such a crisis event would be particularly important. Of course, although we see the closure of many of our tourism businesses, the UNWTO, they have stated clearly that travel should be safe and persons should travel responsibly. So the messaging is important in terms of that continuity in travel. And what we know that there are examples, for instance, of destinations such as Singapore who've gone through this and would have done certain initiatives. We need to capture those practices and learn from them. But what is of particular concern in our Caribbean region is that open skies policy, of course, the Caribbean Tourism Organization, they have led in that regard. Issues around, for instance, Caribbean Airlines having that seventh freedom to not have to travel through the home state, that would become very important in terms of progressing and to help in tourism recovery process.
One of the reasons I was very happy that UWI is organizing this is because I think there are some wonderful case studies that we have that we ourselves can learn from, that we have executed successfully in the past. I think we need to let people know
Yes.
about these, and certainly we need to let UWI and the students at UWI study tourism and hospitality to understand why we are so proud of the collaboration between the public and private sector. Whenever price, if you see, we forget to some degree that people started traveling to the Caribbean initially for health reasons. They came here
True.
because it was such a salubrious atmosphere that they came here in order to improve their health. That was the beginning of travel in the Caribbean. Then we forget that when we go back to the Gulf War, back in the early 1990s, the Caribbean private and public sector came together and ran a campaign using the Beach Boys music, which was current at the time. And there are a lot of people today who are not even, weren't even born then and don't know what we are talking about. But it was an opportunity for us to show how we can work together. Then in 2001, we came up with this theme, Life Needs the Caribbean. What better theme right now to begin to talk about that and the all there comes along in terms of being able to, and then more than anything else, we talk about private and public sector collaboration. The public sector, with all the governments of the Caribbean, the majority, and the private sector got together and came up and spent money together, inviting people to come to the Caribbean, as opposed to just trying to go and do it individually. And the synergy from that, we have a graph that we can show the world that both of those efforts had substantial positive impact on the region. So a great part of what I think all of this is all about, not only scratching our heads and wondering what to do. In effect, we know what to do. We have done some of these things before. But also at the same time, I think right now, while we're in the doldrums, this is the time to begin to prepare a plan that is going to enable us to take biggest advantage of that pent-up demand for travel, where we can begin to grab the largest market share and get ourselves ready for that. I mean, the Keynesian economics says that whenever private sector demand disappears, the public sector comes forward and begin to replace that demand and make sure that we have ourselves putting in place the infrastructure and the platforms necessary to be successful as time comes out. So from a UWI point of view, I think we got a really good story to tell. And I think we're going to find the same kind of collaboration among the governments and the private sector of the Caribbean coming out of this at the right time in order to begin to get, I think, a better market share than we had before when this whole thing started. So I think that's part of where UE capturing that, I think, has great value in the future.
Yes, I certainly believe the University of the West Indies can contribute in the tourism recovery process. We started the UWI COVID-19 task force, and the task force comprises a number of experts across the disciplines, scientists, economists, tourism experts, and the focus would be on bringing the best knowledge to inform the response that we should have in this Caribbean region. Certainly, the task force through UWITV, this um, particular um, channel, and also we have established a website to be able to inform everyone, policymakers, decision makers, private sector, public sector, across the board, and the general public, of course, across the board, to ensure that the relevant, timely information is getting out there to persons um, across the region.
We used to have all kinds of people who were hesitating about how important tourism was to the Caribbean. I mean, if you ever try to find the most unwelcome example of how important tourism is to the region, we're going through it right now. So the other positive thing that's going to come on the backside of this is people beginning to understand something that we have talked about a long time, and it sounds very academic, about the direct, indirect, and induced taxes and also employment. That we have not done a good job in the past of explaining to our governments how important the induced and direct and indirect taxes and employment are. I don't think we have to do that anymore. They're beginning to see that in ways that we wish we never had to show, but there is no question about that. I mean, it's from an academic point of view, Michelle, are there some studies that we think we can begin to initiate and begin to show that? Because I think recording some of this stuff is going to all be to the good.
Yes, Vincent, very important really to keep a record as to how things are evolving, how things are progressing, what some tourism destinations are doing, what are some of the best practices out there that we can learn from. Very important to record. And of course, as the university's COVID-19 task force, we have started to do some of that and to put some of the information out there. But specifically relating to the tourism sector, while there are a number of agencies looking at studies, the IDB, the CDB, of the economic impact, I think what would be particularly important is to look at the social impact, the socio-cultural impact, because you have a number of persons who would have lost their jobs, and how are they going to um, get some kind of means of survival. Of course, there are a number of social systems that are coming um, on stream to handle some of these matters, but we need to look at a crisis such as this, where the tourism industry will not be functioning for several months. What would be the likely sociocultural impact on our Caribbean societies? And I think as well, one area that has been lacking in research in this region is the travel industry. Looking at the travel needs, looking at the airlines, our interregional airlines in particular, looking at our airport operations, looking at health and safety issues surrounding that. I think that would be a very important stream of research going forward, and the University of the West Indies intends to contribute to that.
I'm trying to figure out if there's a way for us to have your department become the repository for so much of the knowledge that we are talking about, some of the challenges we are talking about. Because if you look at it, I mean, there is some kind of pathogen that comes around almost every decade or so that becomes a real problem. So to begin to see what we did today that could have done better. Is there a way for UE to become the repository of kind of best and worst practices about how to address these things? And I'd like to just kind of get a quick comment on that before we start talking about kind of toward the end of what we do to make sure we come out of this with fine. But Michelle?
Yes, certainly the University of the West Indies. We can be a repository for the information that is needed to inform the industry to come out of this crisis that we now face. We have the Center for Hotel and Tourism Management based in the Bahamas, and the Center for Tourism and Policy Research, and the Global Tourism Resilience and Crisis Management Center, both based in Jamaica. And we are ready to contribute in terms of bringing together the research capacity, look at the best and worst practices out there with international, and of course the Caribbean Tourism Organization and the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association, working collaboratively to ensure that we gather the needed information to inform the recovery process. And I look forward for that happening in the very near future.
How can we do a better job of providing your students and anybody associated with UWI with more information about what has been done, what can be done, what is being thought of being done? How can we do a much better job of that?
Yes, there is need to do a better job of getting the information out there. And so it is hoped that a coming together of the various agencies will form a collaborative platform that will continue to inform what we do in this region in terms of tourism recovery. Certainly, the COVID-19 task force, we have a website through initiatives being currently done by UWITV to get expert information out there to inform persons as to what is happening would be very important in the next couple of weeks. Certainly, we can look at the performance data already being obtained by the Caribbean Tourism Organization and the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association and start to do some of the data mining. I know the CTO, they have been phenomenal in gathering a lot of the data internationally and giving access to their membership of the relevant information that persons would need to make certain decisions. What we need to do is harness that data in open format where persons can easily access the information and be able to make appropriate and timely decisions. And another part of that is dissemination of the information, ensuring that the persons who need to make the right decisions have the information at hand. It is not guesswork or not necessarily following what others do, but being able to make the information available from whether it's the World Health Organization, the United Nations World Tourism Organization, being able to get that information out there to everyone who would need it.
Any final thoughts, closing thoughts, Michelle?
Well, in closing, I really hope that this COVID-19 crisis is short term and that we will start to see some management of the crisis in a way that the tourism destinations will be able to recover in as short as possible time. Certainly, I look forward to ongoing discussions, conversations with our regional partners, with other tourism industry experts like yourself, Vincent, to really try and get the relevant information out there to persons. I think it's important that they know that something is happening in the region, um, what is happening, and how do they communicate with all of their clients, their customers, their intermediaries, their marketers, getting the relevant information out there. And I think UWITV being across 15 countries in the region will be an important partner in that regard.